She thought she could betray me and walk away unscathed. But what she didn't know was that while she was playing her little game, I was already 3 steps ahead, setting the stage for her downfall. Ryan's wife tossed out the words like they meant nothing. "I'm not coming home tonight. Don't wait up." She had no idea what was coming. What he found in her purse would confirm every suspicion he had tried to ignore, but even that would pale in comparison to the carefully planned, devastating revenge he was about to unleash. It had been a lucky break, one Ryan hadn't expected. He had prepared himself for another grueling night shift, mentally bracing for exhaustion, but a last-minute schedule change meant he was free to leave early. By 11, he was grinning as he practically bounced to his car, eager to surprise his wife, Eva. He could already picture the way her face would light up when she saw him. After such a long day, all he wanted was to come home, unwind with her, and just enjoy being together. Since she wasn't expecting him until morning, he figured he'd make the night extra special. On the way home, he stopped to pick up a bottle of wine and a bouquet of her favorite flowers. But the moment he pulled into the driveway, that warm excitement was doused like a bucket of ice water. Something wasn't right. A strange feeling crawled up his spine. Eva's car was missing. The house was completely dark. Maybe she just ran out for something, he told himself, but the eerie silence that greeted him as he stepped inside made his skin prickle. His instincts screamed at him that something was off. Frowning, Ryan pulled out his phone and dialed her number. The line rang. What? Twice. Finally she picked up. Her voice was flat, unbothered, almost irritated. "Hey." He let out a breath. "Eva, where are you?" "I got off work early," he said, his voice still carrying some of that lingering excitement. Pause. A long one. Then when she finally spoke, her words were cold, detached. "I'm not coming home tonight." Ryan blinked, thrown completely off guard. "What? What do you mean you're not coming home?" A sharp sigh crackled through the line. "Do you need me to say it again?" Eva snapped. "Did you not hear me the first time?" His stomach tightened. His pulse pounded in his ears. "Eva?" His voice was quieter now, the unease creeping in. "What's going on? Why aren't you coming home?" "I have something important to take care of," Eva said coolly, her tone void of any warmth. "Just leave me alone, all right? I'll be back in the morning." Ryan stood frozen, his pulse hammering in his ears. This wasn't like her. Eva had never spoken to him this way before, so distant, so dismissive. His initial confusion quickly morphed into anger. "Eva, this is unacceptable. You don't just disappear like this. We'll talk about it later." And with that, the line went dead. Ryan remained there in the dark, gripping his phone, his mind racing with possibilities. By morning he was seated at the kitchen table, jaw clenched, waiting. The moment he heard the low hum of Eva's car pulling into the driveway, his heartbeat kicked up. The front door swung open and there she was, calm, collected, acting as if last night had never happened. She barely acknowledged him as she set down her bag. "Morning," she said casually, already heading toward the stairs. "I'm taking a shower." No explanation. No guilt. Not even a second glance. The tension in the room was suffocating, but Ryan held back. Let her think she was in the clear. Instead he stepped outside, his gut screaming at him that something was off. He walked over to her car, sliding into the driver's seat. The dashboard screen was still glowing, displaying recent destinations. One address stood out, 251 Oakwood Drive. The other side of the city. Why would she have spent the night there? Ryan searched every inch of the car, checked the glove compartment, the trunk, even under the seats, but came up empty. No obvious clues, nothing incriminating. Frustration gnawed at him, but he wasn't ready to give up. As he stepped back into the dimly lit living room, his eyes landed on Eva's purse, carelessly tossed onto the entryway table. A heavy feeling settled in his chest as he reached for it. Slowly he unfastened the clasp and peered inside. And then, nestled among her usual belongings, was an open box of rubbers. One was missing. Ryan's breath hitched. For a moment he just stared, his mind going completely blank. Ryan hadn't seen one of these in their home for years. There was no need. They had long since stopped using them. And yet, here it was, undeniable proof of something he wasn't ready to face. There was no mistake. No way to rationalize it. He knew exactly what Eva had been doing. Upstairs the shower shut off. Moments later, Eva strolled down the stairs, her hair wrapped in a towel, looking refreshed, as if she hadn't just shattered his world. She barely glanced at him, but something in his expression made her pause. "What?" she asked, her tone immediately defensive. Ryan tightened his grip on the box in his hand. "We need to talk." She rolled her eyes. About what now? His voice was eerily steady. About where you were last night? Ava stiffened, her arms crossing over her chest. Are you seriously doing this right now? Ryan didn't flinch. Whose house is 251 Oakwood Drive? For a split second, something flickered across her face, hesitation, maybe even fear. But just as quickly it was gone. That's none of your business, she said flatly. Ryan let out a sharp breath, his frustration bubbling over. None of my business? You disappear for the night, lie about it, and you expect me to believe nothing happened? Ava's eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. So what if I stayed there? She shot back. It's not what you think. Ryan scoffed. Then what the hell is it? Tell me, Ava, are you sleeping with him? She let out a slow breath, her defensive tone softening, but not in the way Ryan had hoped. No, Ryan. Owen isn't my lover. His patience was hanging by a thread. Then explain it. Why were you at his house all night? Ava didn't hesitate. Didn't even blink. I owed him. Ryan felt his blood run cold. His entire body tensed as the weight of her words sank in. You owed him? His voice wavered, caught between disbelief and fury. You mean you? He stopped, unable to even say it aloud. Ava didn't back down. I knew he was attracted to me, she admitted, her voice eerily calm. And I decided to give him something in return for helping me out. Ryan's stomach churned. You gave him something? The words tasted like acid. You shared personal moments with him as some kind of payment? Ava remained unfazed, as if she were discussing something as trivial as a business deal. He shook his head, his hands curling into fists. How could you possibly think this is okay? She shrugged. Completely unbothered. It was a professional courtesy, Ryan. He did me a favor. I did him one. That's it. Ryan felt like the ground beneath him had caved in. His world, the one he thought he knew, was crumbling right in front of him. Ava's gaze flickered toward the bouquet of flowers on the counter. The same bouquet he had picked up for her the night before, back when he was still a fool who believed in them. A slow, amused smile tugged at her lips. Wow, honey, are these for me? She stepped closer, trailing a lazy finger along the delicate petals, completely unfazed by the destruction she had left in her wake. Then, as if the conversation had already slipped from her mind, she plucked her wine glass from the table and took a slow sip, her eyes never leaving his. Let's just forget about it and move on. Ryan sat frozen, his pulse roaring in his ears. She wasn't sorry. Not even close. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, she was expecting him to pretend this never happened. To sweep it under the rug like it was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Let's just forget about it, she repeated with a casual shrug, as if she were suggesting they change dinner plans rather than erase her betrayal. Ryan's jaw clenched. She wanted to play games? Fine. He would play along. But not the way she expected. He turned toward the window, staring out at the quiet street as his thoughts sharpened into something cold. The longer he stood there, the clearer his plan became. Ava thought she had made a fool of him. Let her believe that. Let her bask in the illusion that she had won. Because before she saw those divorce papers, before she thought she could walk away unscathed, Ryan would make sure she felt the weight of her choices. Not with yelling. Not with rage. With something far more elegant. A slow, calculated revenge. One she wouldn't see coming. And that was exactly where he would strike first. But before he set his plan into motion, he needed an airtight alibi, something that would place him far from home, completely beyond suspicion. Taking a deep breath, Ryan squared his shoulders, forcing the tension from his body. He had to play the part of the forgiving husband a little while longer. He turned back toward the house, his expression carefully neutral. Ava, he called, his voice steady as he stepped inside. Ryan stepped into the kitchen where Ava sat, leisurely sipping her wine, her posture relaxed as if nothing had happened. She glanced up at him, her expression softening, sensing the shift in his demeanor. When he reached for her hand, she smiled, warm, satisfied, believing everything had fallen neatly back into place. She had no idea she was walking straight into his trap. The next morning, Ryan wasted no time. He arrived at work with one goal in mind, to take the next step. Without hesitation, he walked straight into his boss's office. Greg, his manager, looked up from his desk, eyebrows raised. Ryan, what's up? He asked, leaning back in his chair, clearly not expecting anything unusual. Ryan kept his tone light. Greg, I need a favor. Greg gave him a curious look. What kind of favor? I'd like to request a business trip. Greg frowned slightly but nodded. That could be a good opportunity for you. How long are we talking? Ryan barely hesitated. A week should be enough. In his mind, everything was already falling into place. Greg shrugged. All right. I'll get the paperwork sorted today. You'll have everything you need by the end of the week. Ryan offered a grateful smile. Thanks, Greg. I really appreciate it. By the end of the day, he had everything he needed: signed paperwork, company authorization, and a perfectly legitimate excuse for his absence. His alibi was set. That evening, as he and Ava sat down for dinner, she was none the wiser. She had no clue that while she was basking in her false sense of security, Ryan was already putting his plan into motion. After dinner, he locked himself in his office and got to work. He needed the right people, professionals who could execute his revenge flawlessly. A few hours of research led him to exactly what he was looking for: an event planning group that specialized in flash mobs and elaborate pranks. These weren't just any event organizers. They had orchestrated everything from fake award ceremonies to extravagant surprise proposals. But what Ryan had in mind, this was something entirely different. The next afternoon, he met with them at a quiet cafe a few miles from his house. He laid out his plan with precise detail, watching as their intrigue grew. One of the organizers leaned forward, raising an eyebrow. So, let me get this straight, you want us to stage a performance? Ryan smirked. Not just any performance. It has to be perfect. Ava had no idea. She believed everything between them had gone back to normal. She had no clue that the stage was already being set. She was about to be blindsided. Like clockwork, Ava started her day with her usual routine. She stopped by the cafe near her office, just as she always did, stepping inside and inhaling the comforting scent of fresh pastries and coffee. The familiar atmosphere soothed her, making her feel like everything was back in order. She placed her usual order, a coffee and a croissant, then stood by the counter, lost in thought. And then, the words hit her like a slap to the face. It's truly admirable what you did. Ava's fingers tightened around her coffee cup as a wave of panic crashed over her. Excuse me, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The man beside her chuckled. His smile was polite, but his tone carried something far more unsettling. It's just so generous of you, really, he mused. Not many people would be that giving to their colleagues. With that, he turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Ava rooted to the spot, frozen in place. This was nothing. It had to be. Random people made strange comments all the time. It didn't mean anything. Shaking off the unease, she approached the counter to pay. But before she could, an elderly gentleman in a crisp suit shuffled up beside her. He turned with a warm smile, his eyes lighting up in recognition. Oh, madam, he exclaimed, his voice filled with admiration. I've heard about your generosity. Truly inspiring. Ava stiffened. Excuse me, she said cautiously. The old man nodded sagely as if speaking to some kind of saint. Such a noble sacrifice, he continued. Sharing your body to advance in your career, it's commendable, really. Ava's stomach dropped. This wasn't a coincidence. Twice now, complete strangers had approached her, making those awful insinuations. But how? How did they know? She walked to the office in a daze, the weight of paranoia settling heavy in her chest. By midweek, Ava was on edge. Her nerves frayed to the breaking point. Ava had tried, really tried, to convince herself that the previous encounters were just random flukes. A weird coincidence. Nothing more. But deep down, she knew better. And when she stepped into the cafe that morning, dread wrapped around her like a vice, suffocating her. This wasn't random. Someone knew. And worse, they were spreading it. By the time she reached her office, she could barely focus. Her thoughts were a tangled mess of fear and confusion. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for her phone. She needed answers. She needed reassurance. She dialed Ryan's number, her pulse hammering in her ears. The moment he picked up, she blurted out, "Ryan, something weird is going on." A brief pause. Then his voice came through, flat, emotionless. "What are you talking about?" Ava swallowed hard. "People, strangers, are saying things about me. Personal things. It's like someone is." "I told you," Ryan interrupted, his tone clipped. "I've moved on. Why can't you?" Her breath caught in her throat. "Ryan, please just listen." "No," he cut her off, his voice firm. "I'm busy with work. I don't have time for this nonsense." A second later, her phone buzzed again. Ryan had switched to a video call. The screen lit up, showing him walking through a production facility, a hard hat perched on his head, a safety vest strapped over his shoulders. Machines whirred loudly in the background. "See," he said, his voice sharp. "I'm here handling real work. I don't care about the past, Ava. Stop calling me." And just like that he hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, like a sudden gust of icy wind, the realization hit her. What? He was the only other person who knew. Had he done this? Had he spread her secret? Or had he let something slip to the wrong person? Without wasting another second, Ava grabbed her purse and stormed out of the office. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile floor as she moved through the halls, her pulse racing, her mind spinning. A few minutes later, she stood outside Owen's office. Inside, Owen sat at his desk, completely unaware of the storm that was about to crash down on him. Ava stepped in and closed the door behind her. Owen stiffened, his hands tightening around the edge of his desk. His eyes flickered with something. Guilt? Fear? No, he said quickly before she could even speak. Of course not. Owen shook his head quickly, panic creeping into his expression. I didn't. Don't lie to me. Ava's voice was low, but the anger in her tone was unmistakable. If management finds out, we're done. You know the company's policies? No romantic relationships between employees. Are you an idiot? Do you have any idea what could happen to both of us? Owen's eyes widened, panic flashing behind them. He raised his hands defensively. Ava, I swear I didn't tell anyone. She wasn't sure if she believed him. Her nerves were raw, her thoughts tangled in frustration. Clutching a folder of documents to her chest, Ava walked briskly down the sidewalk, her mind a chaotic whirlwind. Then, out of nowhere, a young man bumped into her hard, sending the folder flying from her grasp. Papers scattered across the pavement, caught in the cool evening breeze. Oh, I'm so sorry, the guy said quickly, crouching down to help her gather them. Ava dropped to her knees beside him, pressing down the frustration bubbling inside her. It's fine, she muttered, her voice tight. But as she reached for a loose sheet of paper, the guy grinned. There was something off about it. Too smug. Too knowing. Come on, he said with an easy shrug. I can see it in your eyes. You like to thank men, especially when it helps your career, right? Ava's breath caught in her throat. Rage flared inside her like wildfire. Her fingers curled into fists. You sick bastard ***D. Ava shouted, her voice trembling with fury. The guy just laughed. A low, sinister chuckle that sent a chill down her spine. Then, without another word, he turned and bolted down the street, disappearing around the corner before she could react. Ava stood frozen, her entire body trembling. This wasn't random. Someone was deliberately tormenting her. Her fingers hovered over her phone screen before she typed into the search bar. Psychotherapist near me. Because at this point there were only two possibilities. Either someone was playing a cruel, calculated game with her, or her mind was unraveling. And either way, she knew one thing for certain. She was standing on the edge of something she couldn't control. By Friday morning, Ava was running on fumes. She had made a decision. No coffee stop. No lingering on the street. She went straight to the office, hoping that drowning herself in work would keep her mind from spiraling any further. Then, just as she was settling into her desk, the front doors swung open. A courier stepped inside, holding an enormous bouquet of deep red roses. A ripple of curiosity spread through the room. Heads turned. Conversations hushed. The courier, oblivious to the tension he had just created, strode toward the center of the office. Then, in a clear, bright voice, he announced, "Delivery for A." The words slammed into her like a freight train. Ava's stomach twisted into knots. All eyes were on her now. Coworkers exchanged glances, smirks playing on their lips. A few even chuckled under their breath. Somewhere in the room, someone cleared their throat. The walls were closing in. The courier cleared his throat and read aloud, his voice ringing through the office. For the sexiest and most divine Ava, who made me happy that magical night. Signed, Owen. For a split second, the room fell into stunned silence. Then the whisper started. Murmured comments. Stifled chuckles. Heat rushed to Ava's cheeks as her coworkers exchanged knowing glances, some covering their mouths to suppress their laughter. The judgment in their eyes was suffocating. Her pulse roared in her ears. This wasn't happening. Without thinking, she lunged forward, knocking the bouquet out of the courier's hands. Roses scattered across the floor, petals crushed beneath her heels. And just when she thought it couldn't get worse, the door to the boss's office flew open. Mr. Thompson stepped out, his sharp gaze sweeping over the scene. Confusion and irritation flashed across his face as he took in the scattered flowers, the crumpled note, and the stunned, visibly shaken courier. His eyes locked onto Ava. What the hell is going on here? The room fell into hushed silence again. The tension was unbearable. Mr. Thompson bent down, picking up the note from the floor. His eyes scanned the words, his frown deepening with every second. Ava's heart pounded against her ribs. "This has to be some kind of sick joke," she blurted out. "I would never." But the words lodged in her throat, suffocated by panic. Mr. Thompson's gaze sharpened. "If Owen is involved in this, I need to know. Now." His voice was firm, unwavering. "Otherwise, you're putting your entire career at risk." Ava's chest tightened. "It's not true," she choked out, but even she could hear the weakness in her own voice. I don't know what's happening. Someone is trying to ruin me." Mr. Thompson exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Ava, you need to calm down." But she couldn't. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Without another word, she turned and ran. Ava snatched up her purse and bolted toward the exit. Her ragged sobs were the only sound cutting through the stunned silence. At that exact moment, Owen walked in. His footsteps faltered as he took in the chaos, the scattered roses, the smirking faces, the shock still lingering in the air. Then he heard it. Ava's words. Her desperate, broken confession. Owen stood frozen. His face drained of all color, his knees wobbling slightly as he struggled to process what had just happened. His wide, panicked eyes darted around the room, meeting the stunned, amused expressions of their coworkers. It was over. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. "Ava?" Owen finally choked out, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Thompson's gaze hardened. "Well, that's it then." His voice was quiet but final. Turning to Owen with a mix of disappointment and authority, he said, "Owen, we need to have a conversation. Now." Owen swallowed hard, shoulders slumped in defeat. Without a word, he followed Mr. Thompson into his office, the glass door swinging shut behind them. Meanwhile, the rest of the office erupted into hushed whispers. Exchanged glances. Suppressed laughter. Barely restrained amusement. Ava's meltdown. Her shocking confession. Owen's pathetic reaction. It had thrown the entire workplace into chaos. Utterly broken, Ava stormed into Ryan's office later that evening. The moment she saw him, her expression twisted into something venomous. "You," she shrieked, jumping to her feet. Ryan barely had time to react before she came charging toward him, her voice shaking with fury. "You did this." Ryan took a slow step back, raising his hands in a calm, non-threatening gesture. "Ava, calm down. What are you talking about? I didn't do anything." But she wasn't listening. "You wanted to ruin me," she accused, advancing toward him. "You set me up, didn't you? You planned all of this." Ava screamed, her voice raw with fury as she brandished the knife. "You think you can destroy me and just walk away?" Ryan's pulse pounded, but he didn't panic. He remained calm, slowly backing away, his fingers slipping into his pocket to retrieve his phone. "Ava," he said firmly, his voice low and soothing. "Put the knife down." Her grip tightened. "You ruined my life, Ryan." She spat. "You made me look like a fool." Without breaking eye contact, Ryan's fingers moved swiftly over his phone screen, dialing 911. "You're not thinking straight," he said, keeping his tone steady. "Let's talk about this." But Ava wasn't listening. Her breathing was ragged, her expression wild, her mind spiraling out of control. The moment the police arrived, the room erupted into chaos. Officers stormed in, weapons drawn, ordering Ava to drop the knife. She resisted at first, screaming a stream of jumbled nonsense, but in the end they subdued her, locking the cuffs around her wrists. Ryan exhaled, feeling a strange mixture of relief and pity. It was over. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed Ava with a severe nervous breakdown. She was placed under temporary psychiatric care, leaving Ryan with the perfect opportunity to put an end to everything. While she was undergoing treatment, he took the final steps he had been planning for weeks. He withdrew a significant sum of money from their joint account, quietly funneling it into a private account under his name. By the time Ava was released, everything was gone. She had nothing. Days later she tracked him down. Her hands clenched into fists, her face twisted in rage. "No, no, no." Her voice dripped with venom as she confronted him. "You stole from me?" she hissed. "You drained our account. You have no right." But Ryan was ready. He met her gaze with icy calm, his expression unreadable. His voice was devoid of emotion as he took a slow step forward. "I didn't steal anything, Ava." He watched as her breathing hitched as she wavered just slightly. Then he delivered the final blow. "But I will tell you this, our home security cameras recorded everything. The night you came at me with that knife?" Ava's face turned deathly pale. Her lips parted slightly as if trying to form words. But there was nothing left to say. Ryan took in the moment, the weight of his victory settling over him. It was done. It had taken patience, careful planning, but in the end, Ava had fallen by her own hand. That was the final blow, but Ryan wasn't done yet. Ava might have been out of his life, but he wasn't just walking away. While she was unraveling, Ryan was moving forward. Within a week, he had everything in place. A new apartment, a fresh start, and a solid legal team ensuring Ava would never be a problem again. But Ava? She was spiraling. The last time he saw her, she was a shell of the woman she once was, exhausted, desperate, clinging to whatever power she thought she had left. But the truth was written all over her face. She had lost. And Ryan? He walked away without ever looking back. It had taken time. Planning. Patience. But in the end, Ava had destroyed herself. And Ryan? He had won. Weeks passed and Ryan's life slowly returned to normal. Ava was gone, her presence nothing more than a fading nightmare. He had moved into a sleek new apartment downtown, one with no memories of her lurking in the corners. His routine was simple: work, gym, the occasional night out. No drama. No chaos. Just peace. But peace never lasted long. One evening as he stepped out of his building, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. His jaw tightened. He already knew. Against his better judgment, he answered. Ryan? Ava's voice was thin, broken, unrecognizable. His grip tightened on the phone, but he said nothing. I know you hate me, she continued, her breath shaky. But I need to see you. Please. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. He should have hung up right then and there. But instead, he exhaled slowly and asked, why? A beat of silence. Then, I need your help. Ryan almost laughed. Asking for his help? After everything? He kept his voice calm, controlled. Help with what, Ava? Pause. Then her voice, weak, almost desperate. I have nowhere to go. No one else to turn to. Ryan stared out at the city lights, expression unreadable. She was lying. She always had an angle. Always a trick up her sleeve. That's not my problem. Ryan, please, she begged. Just hear me out. He let out a slow breath, rubbing his temple. This was a mistake. But something in him, curiosity, maybe closure, made him say, fine. One meeting. Tomorrow. No. Public place. Thank you, she whispered. He ended the call before she could say anything else. The next day, Ryan sat at a small cafe, arms crossed as he waited. Then Ava walked in. And for the first time in his life, he barely recognized her. Ava looked nothing like the woman he once knew. Her usual confidence? Gone. Her sharp, calculating gaze? Dulled. She was thinner, her hair a little unkempt, dark circles shadowing her tired eyes. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, a far cry from the polished, put-together woman she had always been. For a moment Ryan felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just indifference. Ava hesitated near the entrance, scanning the cafe until her eyes met his. She took a slow breath, squared her shoulders and walked toward him. Ryan didn't stand. Didn't greet her. He just waited. She slid into the chair across from him, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. For the first time in forever she looked nervous. Ryan leaned back, arms crossed. You have 5 minutes? Ava swallowed, licking her lips before speaking. I need money. Ryan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Of course you do. Her jaw clenched, but she didn't argue. She knew she had no leverage left. I lost everything, Ryan. Her voice wavered. My job, my savings. I can't even get an interview because of what happened. You destroyed me. Ryan tilted his head, amused. I destroyed you? Ava flinched but pressed on. I just need help getting back on my feet. Alone, something. Please. Ryan studied her for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. No. Ava blinked. What? He smirked, shaking his head. You don't deserve my help, Ava. And you know it. Her hands curled into fists. Ryan, please. You made your bed, he cut in coldly. Now lie in it. Her eyes burned with emotion, anger, regret, maybe even fear. But Ryan? He felt nothing. He pushed back his chair, stood and tossed a few bills on the table. Goodbye, Ava. And just like that he walked away, leaving her exactly where she belonged, in his past. Ryan stepped out of the cafe, feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin. It was over. No lingering doubts. No second thoughts. Ava had been reduced to a ghost, a shadow of the woman who once controlled his life. And now, She had no more power over him. As he walked down the street, he thought back to everything: the betrayal, the lies, the humiliation. It had once consumed him, nearly destroyed him. But not anymore. He had won. Not through anger. Not through reckless revenge. But by taking back his life. By the time he reached his car, he felt lighter than he had in years. Ryan slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and took one last look in the rearview mirror. Ava was nowhere in sight. She was nothing more than a memory now. With a smirk, he shifted into gear and drove off. Toward his future. Toward a life without her. The end.